Over many years, I've been working in Kakuma Refugee Camp in Kenya, which is on the border with South Sudan. And we started to think about the needs of the teachers working in that camp, both refugee teachers and national teachers, and how their needs were being met or not being met in that particular space. And obviously coming at it from an education approach, but very quickly realizing that there were child protection and child rights opportunities to discuss in that work. And so we ended up designing an initiative called Teachers for Teachers, which is connected to a larger interagency effort called Teachers in Crisis Contexts. And the work kind of centralizes around a set of modules. One is on teachers' role and well-being. One is on child protection, well-being, and inclusion. Another is on pedagogy. And finally, a module on curriculum and instruction. And so we work with the teachers through those different training modules, but then the idea is to add on other layers of support through peer coaching, and we did mobile mentoring as well. And what was interesting about that project is that we were there to talk about pedagogy and teaching practice, but time and again, the teachers would raise issues around child protection and concerns that they had about their students, both in the training room and in the relationships with their peer coaches, and through the distance connection over WhatsApp with their mobile mentors. Things ranging from corporal punishment and how to handle issues of indiscipline in their classrooms, and also how to more appropriately respond to concerns that their students were raising or that they were identifying in their classrooms around early marriage, around pregnancy, and other issues that were causing concern amongst the young people in their charge. Kakuma is a very diverse camp, so there are refugees coming principally from South Sudan and Somalia, but also Democratic Republic of Congo, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, etc. It's been there for many years, the camp, over 25 years now. So they're going on third generation being born in that camp in many cases. Of course, there still continue to be new arrivals from different countries like South Sudan that are still experiencing violence and civil unrest. But what we found with the teachers that we were working with, the vast majority had come as younger children to the camp, and thereby got education access in the camp. So they might have gone to primary school and then finished secondary school, either in the camp or outside of the camp, but their residence is the camp. And simply by graduating secondary school, they became eligible to be teachers in Kakuma, and they would apply for a position with one of the local implementing organizations working in the camp and responsible for education. And then in many cases, literally thrown into the classroom with very little additional to no training in this particular context. Yeah. The module on teachers' role and well-being really was kind of a first attempt for them to think expansively about the scope of their work. Of course, they're there to deliver a curriculum and to engage in good pedagogical practices, but what else? What else can a teacher do in that space? It's also really important for the teachers to think about their own well-being and how that would interact or influence positively or negatively the children's well-being in their classrooms. And so we tried to talk about stress management, how to manage the multiple roles that teachers are often asked to play, rightfully so or not, in context of displacement and crisis, and how they can seek support for themselves, and if not, through peer support or just own individual practices, kind of manage and mitigate the stress and the workload that comes with being a teacher anywhere around the world, but the heightened kind of sense of responsibility that can come from working in a crisis context. In Kenya, corporal punishment is technically illegal. There are policies and practices that are trying to abolish that, more negative approach to discipline. However, we saw it with our own eyes on many events, many cases of visiting the schools and seeing teachers, using a cane on the school grounds, in their classrooms, just for simply getting kids to class, or if they answered incorrectly, they would use it. If they would obviously engage in fighting or other, more kind of disruptive practices, they would be disciplined using the cane. And we would see very extreme uses of the cane. And so in the module and the training room on child protection, child rights, inclusion, it came up and we wanted to talk about it and try to our best ability to create a safe space to hear from the teachers about why they use corporal punishment or why they thought teachers in that context used corporal punishment, what some alternatives might be, and what were the challenges for changing their own practice. And we were pleasantly surprised to find teachers be quite honest about why they were using it. And this really interesting disconnect around when they were kids themselves and students themselves, they would almost all cite how negatively harmful, of course, being beaten as a student was. And then as they became teachers, then they would start to justify their own use of corporal punishment. So while they would reflect on their own time as a student in the classroom and really remembering that vividly and how much it affected their classroom experience, then they were now resorting to it as a teacher. And so we were able to kind of uncover that irony and that tension in the training room. And teachers would talk about needing to exert their authority, feeling insecure about being teachers, and that was one way to perhaps demonstrate that they could manage the classroom. Female teachers who had older students and physically bigger students in their classroom, feeling like that was the only way they were going to get respect from their teachers. So there were kind of myriad examples of why they were using it. And then early on in the training, it was interesting, one brave soul, a young woman from Uganda, stood up and said, "But we shouldn't do it." Without any of our prompting, we didn't plant her in the audience or anything like that. She just said there are other ways to respond to discipline issues. And that kind of really organically opened up this space to talk about other ways to handle the situation. And so that was just kind of a turning point in that initial training to say, okay, what are the alternatives and what type of support do teachers need to actually try different approaches? And over many months, we would check in with teachers about this issue. They kept talking about it in the teacher learning circles that the peer coaches were facilitating. They were talking about it with us as project kind of management staff and researchers in the field. And I remember one focus group I had with teachers, and that was basically the focus that they wanted to talk about was corporal punishment. And they started saying about how they had stopped using it. And I was a little dubious. I said, okay, give me an example, why and how. And teachers were able to give pretty nuanced explanations. They'd say, you know what, I don't carry the cane anymore on the school grounds. My classroom is cane free. And I find other ways to deal with cases of indiscipline. Maybe they still need to pick up trash in the compound, but they don't need to be physically hit because of some infraction. And I remember saying, I know it might be hard to be honest with me, but are you still using it at all? And a few hands went up and said yes, but significantly less. And when I kind of prompted them to tell me more about that, what was great in that conversation was to hear them say, I noticed a big difference when I stopped using the cane. And when I again probe, so what changed? They say, students talk to me now. They come up and they say hello, they say good morning. They raise their hand in the classroom and ask questions. And it was this almost immediate feedback loop to them when they decided to approach discipline differently, that they saw the immediate benefit on the children and the way they wanted to engage in the learning environment. And they found over time, this didn't happen overnight, of course, but over time, students from other classes were flocking to them to get advice and to ask questions because they felt safe doing so. And I don't know, numerous teachers made really profound statements. It wasn't just one or two compelling cases, but multiple teachers who shared that same story about changing the way they approach discipline and the immediate impact that they saw on their children and the environment that they were trying to create in their classroom. What kind of sparked this conversation on the focus of corporal punishment, we started talking about other issues that were coming up around child marriage, around early pregnancy and things like that. And we again had a focus group with some teachers just to kind of better understand what the concerns were. And what we heard, this was a couple years ago already, that when there was a concern or something came to light in their classroom, teachers did not trust reporting the violation through the child protection system that was supposedly in place either in the school community or in the greater surrounding camp community. And when we asked why, they would give very detailed answers again about how, 2 reasons. One, they didn't feel that the identity of the child in question would be protected, and that they actually wouldn't come up with a positive resolution to that child's dilemma. And that 2, by coming forward as a teacher, they would be further exposed. Their identity would not be protected, and there could be potential, almost leaks into the community about who was saying what about whom. And so they did not have any faith in kind of the basic ethical foundations of a child protection reporting system, and so therefore didn't engage with it. And then the interesting thing that happened, and this doesn't happen in all cases, I think, some teachers are probably more innately disposed to just caring and wanting to take that extra step on behalf of their children. But I think because of the module that we had on child protection rights and well-being, and again, kind of teachers understanding the broader scope of the work and the protective role that they could play in their children's lives, they started kind of taking things on their own. So instead of following these formal channels for reporting child violations, child protection violations, they were taking it on their own. So for example, one teacher was noticing every time he came to school, he was passing a home where 2 young boys were in tattered uniforms from a different school. The boys went to his school, but they went to a different school, so didn't have shoes on, had tattered uniforms, seemed to be engaged in fairly heavy child labor. And then slowly over days and weeks kind of struck up a conversation with them in an effort to kind of find out what was going on with them. He felt compelled to do this not only because of our training, but he himself had been an unaccompanied young man in the camp and felt that sense of isolation and not having somebody care for him, and just felt the need to extend himself and learn more about these boys. And it turned out that they were in a foster family with an aunt, but didn't have their immediate family anymore. And he wanted to confront the family or raise the concerns with the family, but was concerned because he knew that the aunt had kind of deep connections with the local police. And he himself had just secured a coveted scholarship to go to university in Canada. And he worried that by confronting her, she might do something to jeopardize that, file a police report or worse. And so he feared that this would, trickle over into the community. So in that case, it doesn't actually have a perfect resolution, but we were able to connect him with someone else within UNHCR, not the immediate kind of child protection reporting organization. He was able to share his concerns. We actually don't know if they were able to look into it or not. We know that the boys ultimately were not moved, but the same teacher made sure that when he left to go pursue his scholarship, that his friends and fellow teachers were going to periodically check in with the boys. And so that's one example where, because of a fraught system, it didn't actually see its way through the process, and a teacher had to make a difficult decision about how to engage with that community or not, and the risks that it took. And there are other examples around, in a different school, a different teacher with the head teacher and another teacher impregnating a couple of the girls in the school, and that everybody clearly knew about it. Most of the teachers were from that same refugee community. One teacher was not, and she did kind of move forward and report it. And then the case was handled very irresponsibly, where the organization responsible for child protection, and now this teacher who was visibly very uncomfortable reporting but felt compelled to come forward, they showed up in their clearly marked, car with their clearly marked logos on their, shirts, and pulled her out of a training on the school campground in front of all of the other teachers to talk about this issue. And she was just, so kind of bereft and fearful about what might happen, and that if, the charge came back to the school, it would be very clear that she was the one who had reported it. Not only did they show up to talk to her the one time, they did it again. And there was this kind of repeated irresponsible behavior by the NGO responsible for child protection, and in this case, teacher protection on this particular issue. So again, and she ultimately was able to move to a different school and was able to kind of distance herself from this particular issue. But in the moment was, fearful for herself, fearful for her family, and the relationship she'd have with the surrounding community. So just, a really kind of disturbing example of how badly some of these cases can be handled, and not only the risk to the young girls involved in this case, but now a teacher who's been kind of brave enough to come forward, who isn't also afforded the same kind of protective layers of support that she would need to continue to teach in the camp and to be an advocate for children. When I think of school community, I think of the whole milieu of people who are involved, and again, I'm thinking about this one particular refugee context. So, of course, it's the children, it's the teachers, it's the head teachers and the school leaders that might be in place in a school setting like this. Increasingly, these schools are trying to engage with the local community. There are school management committees, there are parent-teacher associations, there are very kind of proactive and dynamic efforts made to have the community feed into what's happening in the school. Some of that is actually around child protection. There are other examples in the same case study where, again, teachers took it upon themselves to create child protection committees. They're supposed to happen in every school. Most of them are often dormant, they're on paper only. But again, through the training and through the conversations with teachers, they would take it on themselves to activate the Child Protection Council committee, with different representatives and stakeholders. So that's kind of, I think, the one layer of the school community. But again, in different contexts, you would also have United Nations agencies that are, informing some of that work. Obviously, the local non-governmental organizations or international organizations working in that space have stakes in some of those schools because of funding, because of recruitment, because of, paying teachers, et cetera. So it can be a quite, multi-member school community if we think about it holistically. Yeah.